And I will say that medical intuition is not an energy healing modality. It is a foundational assessment skill that can support any healing modality, whether it's conventional medicine or energy practices.
Hello and welcome to Get Yourself Optimized. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer. It is my pleasure to have Wendie Colter with us today. Wendie is a medical intuitive and author. Her accredited certification program, Medical Intuitive Training, has been pivotal in helping wellness professionals optimize their intuition. Her trailblazing research is published in the Journal of Alternative and Complementary Medicine. She's author of the groundbreaking book, Essentials of Medical Intuition, A Visionary Path to Wellness. Wendie, it's so great to have you on the show.
Thank you, Stephan. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'd love to hear your story of how you got started with medical intuition. Is this something that you've known you've had as an ability since childhood, or was there some sort of pivotal moment where it came online and you had some sort of epiphany?
A lot of people ask me that. It's such a great question. And the answer to that is yes, and yes, and yes. I was always intuitive as a child. I think most children are. In fact, I know they are. Kids are very intuitive. And when I was a kid, my intuition was considered a creative skill in my household. So it was not shushed or, told don't say those things, things like that. So I was able to actually express myself in terms of my intuition, which really sort of set me up for understanding a little bit more about what this was. It never felt shameful to me. It was always a curiosity to me. It's like, oh, that's interesting. So later in life, when I became an energy healer, with a modality, there are many, many kinds of energy modalities. I found that as I was working on my clients, working with my clients, I'd receive a lot of flashes of insight, also not uncommon for healers who work with the biofield and energy, to kind of get these flashes of insight every so often where you have an awareness of something that's going on in your client's life or has gone on in their life, what's going on in their physicality and their physiology. And I realized that there was some information in there that was of value to the client. Now, the thing that turned the corner for me as a healer was the difference between me doing an energy healing on someone and someone leaving my office feeling great, and then coming back with very similar issues still embedded, you could say, in their energy. What was keeping it there? Why did someone release completely and somebody else did not? So that was a point of curiosity to me. And as those flashes of insight were showing up, I thought, I wonder if I could kind of just do that for a moment before I do a healing to see what's keeping something sticky or in place. And I started developing my skills of medical intuition. I didn't call it that at the time. I wasn't sure what to call it. And I started noticing that information that I could discern from their physicality, their physical body, their biofield, their life history, whatever there was to see, and there was so much to see, that information, and I didn't do any healing work with it. It was so powerful for people that after I did that piece, and then I started doing my healing work with them, they were able to release, in many cases, things permanently that they hadn't been able to prior. And I thought there's something really important here. And I learned this is called medical intuition from Carolyn Mace's work and others. And I started developing it as a skill set to stand alone. This is something that I wanted to offer to my clients without the healing part, because I noticed that the informational part was even more valuable to them, because what if my modality of healing wasn't the right one for them, right? What if I could discern what could help them? And that became part of my practice. And I've been doing this for 20-something years now.
Yeah, and so sometimes I'm guessing you'll find that there's some sort of past life issue that is causing this to crop up in their current life, and this is a clue to some unfinished business, maybe some trauma that's unhealed, or some karmic debt that's still unpaid.
I'll say this about that. Past life information is really powerful and it can come forward for sure. I concentrate more on present life. There, we rack up karmic debt all the time. It's not necessarily from a past life. And we are subject to the traumas of our own life. And there's a lot of research on that, Stephan, about early life trauma leading to later life health issues. And it doesn't even have to be early life. All along the way, there's opportunities for awareness. And it's challenging in life to get that kind of awareness if you don't have a regular practice. And even then, it's challenging. So, medical intuition to me seems less like, every now and then kind of an unusual circumstance or a crisis moment. To me, it seems like healthcare or the adjunct or support to healthcare, which is really the way to think about it. It is the way to check in with your body. It is the way to get a good look at what's going on physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually in any moment. And that's how I see it. And I'll say that's how I see it working with healthcare. I see this skill as being a major support system to mainstream healthcare. And that's been my focus. And that's why when I teach healthcare providers. So I'm teaching people who are licensed or certified in some acknowledged healthcare field: doctors, nurses, acupuncturists, chiropractors, massage therapists, mental health care. It goes on. A lot of nurses, and these are people who work with patients every day. And so their ability to discern in a more intuitive and finely tuned way helps them do their job more effectively. And that's when I decided to teach. I decided to teach that sector because these are the people that will make a difference in their patients' lives.
Yeah, yeah, and one of the key things to do when you're, let's say, doing an energy healing on somebody is to ask their permission.
Oh,
If you're doing a
yes.
remote healing, you don't just beam them healing energy without their permission. You do it after they've said yes. And I would imagine that also applies to medical intuition. You don't just
Oh,
scan
yeah.
somebody's physicality as you're sitting down with them over a meal without them knowing it, right?
Yes, you've nailed it. That is the magic word. Permission is everything. And you're also talking, I think, Stephan, about ethics, good
Mm.
ethics. And in my program, I really put an emphasis on ethics from the beginning because people don't really understand energy. What does that mean, energy? Well, in my world, working with energy is the same as working with anything. You have to know your scope of practice. You have to know how to do an ethical session. And there's a lot of important information out there that is not really well talked about or understood. So it is a major part of my curriculum.
Could you walk through a little bit of your curriculum and how someone would go from a newbie, not even realizing they're at all psychic or intuitive, to being able to scan somebody's energy and body for ailments and issues?
Well, it's a learning curve,
Mm.
right? Since you understand the language of intuition, the skill set that I teach is clairvoyance, clear seeing. And the learning curve comes not really from the skill set, although that is like learning a new language. For most people, it's like working a new muscle. That's how I frame it because it really is. It takes practice. It isn't usually the clair, the intuitive sense that most people feel comfortable with. Most people feel comfortable with clairsentience, which means, clear feeling things in your emotions or your body, or claircognizance, which is sort of a knowingness, like a download, people call it, or clairaudience, hearing things, inner guidance. But seeing it takes practice and it takes a good teacher, in my opinion, someone who can really walk you through the steps of it and have you understand the skill set that it is. If you can imagine, you can use the skill. That's definitely a mind's eye kind of a practice. So generally what we do is we start with the idea of using the mind's eye and imagining. And for very left-brained, wonderful left-brained healthcare providers, this is probably the biggest learning curve because they're used to using their body of knowledge for their work, and they should. That's what we want in our practitioners. But this is a whole other. This is tapping into what they call non-local consciousness, right? You've heard that phrase?
Yes.
Yes, obviously, and it means it's not about the locality between us. It's not about you and me and what I know or what you know. It's about that broader field of quantum consciousness, I guess you could say, that is more all-knowing. That's where the information can be accessed. So that skill set is quite specific. And that's what I teach in the program. That is a bit of a learning curve, but everybody gets it.
So could you maybe walk us through a piece of that, like how somebody would go from just being able to imagine, let's say, a pink elephant in their mind's eye, to actually being able to imagine, not really imagine, but kind of sense in their mind's eye the presence of an angel in the room?
That's lovely. Well, there is a workshop that I offer where I teach everyone, not just healthcare providers, how to tap into your own physical body and how to look and discuss and have a conversation with your physical body. And to me, that is the essence of medical intuition. It's called Medical Intuition for Healing and Self-Care. And that's going to be a self-study program coming up in a few months from now. And that's on the website. There's also exercises in my book about how to do that. And what that's about is really listening and, in this case, visualizing our body so that we can understand what's going on. We can have a conversation and we can receive information, most importantly, about what the body is asking for. What does it want? What does it need? These are really important questions for us to ask, especially with healthcare, but also with our spiritual care as well.
So what would be an example of something that you were told or shown that your body needs and it wasn't getting it, or you had some exposure to something that was not healthy and you needed to course correct or ameliorate the situation?
Well, I can tell you that my body talks to me all the time. Whether I listen is another story. That's kind of the human way, right? But there are plenty of experiences of that where, my body has said, pay attention, wake up, look at this, notice this. And, these are my clients as well. This is why somebody calls a medical intuitive, because they have a sense that they need more information about something. And pretty much every one of my clients comes to me for this reason. Can you look? Can you see what's going on? Maybe the doctors aren't seeing what I'm sensing. That happens a lot, Stephan. And that is not necessarily a failing of conventional medicine. It's more like a non-understanding of conventional medicine. Conventional medicine doesn't recognize this yet. And so, people that come to medical intuitives have had experience after experience where they feel like they're not listened to, they're not heard, and they have a sense of that. It's really quite fascinating, and there really should be some research done on this if there hasn't already, because the understanding of the patient's intuition often surprises the doctors. And that's not the way it should be, right? In my opinion, all doctors should have a medical intuitive to work with, all medical intuitives. I mean, I teach doctors to be medical intuitives, right. And that helps get to the root causes faster. It helps get to the issues. I mean, story after story after story. What I'm doing as a medical intuitive is I'm giving my client a roadmap. Here's what I see. Here's what your body is showing me it's asking for. Here's what you can bring to your doctor and say, can we go forward with this? That is the value and use of medical intuition, whether it's for yourself or if you're medical intuitive for your client or patient. And that's really my focus.
All right. Are you still doing energy healing, or you've
Not anymore. I stopped doing that a long time ago. I love it. I teach it, but I've found that the medical intuitive assessment is even more valuable for clients because, again, what if my modality isn't the right one for them? What if there's 100 modalities out there and one of them would really do the job? So I don't want to impose my own, you know, if it's not necessary. I love energy healing and I love the world of energy healing. And I will say that medical intuition is not an energy healing modality. It is a foundational assessment skill that can support any healing modality, whether it's conventional medicine or energy practices.
And I'm sure you get a fair amount of skepticism from medical professionals. What do you do to sway them or win them over that this is actually, legit and it's verifiable through research and what have you? What have you done there?
Well, I do a lot of speaking at conferences, healthcare conferences, holistic care, integrative care. And I'm very proud to say that I have spoken at some of the top complementary integrative institutions in the U.S., universities and hospitals and whatnot. And you would be surprised at the reception. Yes, there's always skepticism, and why not? There should be. This is not a well-studied field, and it needs to be a well-studied field. So these kinds of studies that we were able to, the study that we were able to create went a long way to assuaging some levels of skepticism. It was an exploratory study, but we received 94 to 98% accuracy rates with our graduates in terms of what they saw in the body, how they described it, the consistency with a known diagnosis, things like that. I mean, that was astounding work, and that we got it written up in a very well respected complementary integrative journal.
Yeah,
Went a
that's
long
the
way.
Journal of Alternative and Complementary Medicine.
Yes, it's now called the Journal of Integrative and Complementary Medicine, as those terms are changing. But that was the first research in over 25 years on this skill set, which is a shame. So we need more research. That goes a long way to knocking down skepticism. However, this is a woo-woo field, What are we talking about? Quantum consciousness? It's like the proof is in the result.
Yeah.
And when the results are deemed, found, shown to be, upper 90%, mid to upper 90% accuracy, that brings people through the door. People are like, we want to know more. As well, they should. So skepticism, I welcome it. Why not? The key to that is, what is your personal perception intuitively? That's the key. And when people start to find that they can develop this for themselves, even for their own health and well-being, the skepticism falls away, because it's about how do you, what's your perception of it?
Yeah. Has Netflix come knocking on your door to have you on a show or anything like that?
Not yet. I'd welcome that.
Yeah, yeah. Have you seen Tyler Henry on Netflix?
No, I haven't. Is he a medical intuitive? Forgive me for not
No,
knowing.
he's just he's a regular psychic, but
Uh,
he's a Hollywood medium, and he goes to these different celebrities, and they film it like
oh,
it's
got it.
like a reality show, and it's actually quite good.
I'm
He's
sure it
legit.
is.
He's
You
legit.
know, I'll tell you what I think about this, Stephan. I think we're in a kind of a renaissance of
Mm.
intuitive practices. Energy healing is biofield science, all of these integrative, complementary. What does this all mean? It's a funny time because 10 years ago, I would say I didn't even see this level of interest. Certainly not from the healthcare sector or other sectors, the business sector and things like that. We've got articles in USA Today and Time Magazine and Forbes and all these, really conservative or traditionally conservative outlets that are saying, maybe there's something to this woo-woo stuff, and that is fascinating, right? That's awesome, because that means there's an opening for what has traditionally been sidelined and, in history burned at the stake. How far back do you want to go? We're seeing that people are starting to be open to concepts that were not necessarily accepted even 20, 30 years ago. That's a great thing. It means that we're integrating more of our own true natures into our lives.
I think it's important for people who are getting on the bandwagon of this kind of woo-woo stuff that they're not forgetting that God is the source of all this. There's a lot of New Age stuff that leaves God out of the picture, or even quantum healing and things like that. That it's just talking about the field and quantum, but hey, where's God in all this? Because He's the source of everything. He is all that is, and there's a danger of getting off course, I think. What
Well,
do you think about
that's a lovely way to say it. I embrace all faiths, and I embrace non-faiths, meaning spirituality, which isn't necessarily considered faith-based. However, um, what you're talking about is our true nature and our true connection to all that is, our true connection to the idea of spirituality, the idea of what is this other that we contain, what is this broader sense of being a human, what does it mean to be with other humans on the planet, what is all this about, right? And it's beautiful. I think all the religions of the world at their core have the same understanding of the human experience. And when we tap into that, when we understand that, and this practice for me is highly spiritual. It's a spiritual practice, and that is it brings a level of profound. Um, this is going to sound odd, and I'm going to find the word for it. It's like the profound in the everyday, right? The spiritual understanding and awareness in just everyday life, right? And that seems to exist across the board in the essence of what true spirituality is, whether it's religious or non or something, outside of the realm of, you know, tradition. But whatever it is, it's gorgeous. And if it brings people, and it brings people that sense of connectedness, which is I think it's critical.
Yeah, yeah, and because the opposite of this feeling or truth of connection is the illusion of separation. That we're
Beautifully said.
separate from each other. That we're separate from God. That we're separate from Mother Nature, from the trees that are growing in the forests. We're all part of the one.
We're all made of the same stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Some people
Our
call it
body.
stardust, but it's really
Yeah.
God dust.
Yeah, I would say it's universal intelligence, universal love, universal knowledge. There's so many ways to talk about this, and they're all gorgeous.
Mm.
And I encourage my students, I don't come from any specific point of view other than the energetic in my programs. And that allows people to interpret that concept however they choose. And it's real, it's correct, however you interpret it.
Yeah, yeah. So,
Yeah, it's lovely.
is there some sort of modality for learning to be part of the one that's not just the medical intuition training, but maybe as a kind of a precursor or a something that augments what you teach? Do you send people, for example, to Joe Dispenza for stuff on learning about the quantum field and about how to be all connected with each other?
Well, there's no prerequisites to the program, the main program, other than that you're a wellness professional. For the workshop, the it's now a stealth study program, which we'll be launching soon. That is for everyone, and you don't need any prerequisite for that. That is just come as you are. And so is the main program. I don't expect anyone to come in with any kind of prior knowledge. It's not required. You can come in without having done any kind of intuitive work, and that goes for all of my offerings, that I the classes and the book too. Um, this is a learning curve for most everybody. And even if you have a long history in meditation and spiritual practice, some of it will feel familiar because we're not talking about anything that isn't familiar on some level, right?
Hmm.
So even if you're new to it, there will be things that you'll understand them from another perspective.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Do you meditate? And if so, what
Oh,
sort of
yes.
modality and frequency? What's your kind of process or routine?
Yes, and if people ask me what's the one thing I can do to kind of raise my own intuitive ability, and I say to everyone, meditate. It doesn't matter what kind of meditation you do. It doesn't matter if it's transcendental meditation or breath work or, any number of the opportunities out there. And there's so many mindfulness and I mean dozens, if not hundreds or thousands. Any kind of meditation practice that feels good, that gets you feeling centered, that gets you feeling connected to your body, connected to your spirit, connected to your breath, anything is fine. I do a practice that I've refined over the years where I work with earth energy and universal energy. I do kind of a cleansing meditation. And the idea there is for me to maintain another magic word is called neutrality. And that is a practice of keeping my energy balanced. And that's a really important process for medical intuition. It's what I teach. And it's very specific to the program. Honestly, people ask me this all the time. I say, just find something you like. If it's a meditation practice that you can't sit there and do, find another one. It's not like there's one that's better than the other. Everybody's unique. I used to do transcendental meditation and I loved it. I found that the one I do now actually engages my thinking mind more than that did. That one wanted you disengage your thinking mind. I can't really do that as well. I have a very active mind. So I need to use my mind in meditation, and that's the practice that I've evolved.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and one technique for meditation that I recently heard about is called Ziva.
Hmm.
And a friend of mine, a close friend, he's had really profound benefits from this. He was not really into meditation. He tried different modalities, and none of them really stuck or really got him much value other than just quieting his mind. But this one has been a game changer. He
Mm.
listened to the audio book of the founder of Ziva. Yes, it's Emily Fletcher is the founder of Ziva, and the book is called Stress Less, Accomplish More.
Nice. Love that title.
Mm.
Stress less.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
seems like
that's
we're
lovely.
so much in fight or flight in the sympathetic nervous system, and it's hard to tune in when you're in that kind of a state. Also, when you said like that
Yeah.
neutrality, that is important if you're not neutral, but you're like in this fear or anxiety or you're just kind of discombobulated about something. Let's say you've got some sort of issue personally or a family member. It's harder to receive clear information on what's going on if you're all sucked into the emotion of it.
Yeah. That's a key there. Um, our emotions are critical. Our emotions are signposts. Our emotions are telling us what's out of balance. And what's hard to understand and remember, put it that way, in the human experience about emotions is that if we don't process them, and that's a funny word, that doesn't really mean much. If we don't experience them, we can have problems in our physicality, in our lives. But if we also dwell in them and let them permeate the negative emotions, anyway, that's what I'm talking about. If we kind of let them run the show, then we're also putting ourselves out of balance. So, this is one of these things that I see in society again, with the resurgence or the understanding that intuition is critical and the biofield has a part to play. There's also the understanding that our emotions it's so important for us to process them, understand them, see what's going on, what's underneath, journal about it, talk to somebody, get some support with it. All of this is so important because of the way our bodies metabolize, you could say, everything, right? Metabolize emotions, thoughts, feelings, our physicality. We want to find balance, and meditation is one way to find it, and working with our emotional state is critical. When I look into somebody's energy, that is after the physicality of it, exactly where I go is what are the emotions that are driving this issue? What is the life history that shows the just this whole movie, you could say, of what's
Mhm.
going on in someone's life or what happened in someone's life that had such an emotional impact that it's at the root of a physical imbalance. That's fascinating to look at. And it is always an eye opener for my clients because you wouldn't put those things together in the logical mind. Why would there's a wonderful book called The Body Keeps the Score
Yes.
by Bessel van der Kolk, and he's a psychologist, I believe, and he's done a lot of research about this. Um, what is it called? ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, is very, very well researched, where early life trauma has this residual effect into adult life, and it can cause tons of physical and emotional havoc and life havoc. So we need to understand what's happening emotionally for us as children, as adults, as last week, what happened. And this is where tuning into our bodies and our minds and our spirits can really help us navigate these waters.
Now, on podcasts, do you ever look at the energy of the host with their permission, of course?
I'll tell you what, Stephan, I've been asked that many times, and I've also been asked to do, take calls and all this. I don't do public readings. Only, I'll tell you why. There's such intimate personal information in your energy that I would perceive that I don't think you'd want the world hearing that, number one. And number two, it's a little bit, it kind of goes outside of the ethical scope. It's kind of like how doctors and patients have confidentiality. I feel the same way about medical intuition. It needs to be
Mhm.
confidential. And I wrote a lot of case studies in my book with permission from the folks. They signed off on it. They got to see how I was talking about it, and they wanted the world to know. So only with that level of um, permission, you can say, would I share anything.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, what would be an example? And that's totally fine. I have medical intuitive abilities myself, so
I'm sure you
I
do.
can tune in. But the next thing I'm curious about is what are some of the case studies from your book that really jump out at you as ones that you'd want to talk about in this episode?
I would love to talk about, there are two that I generally talk about, but the one that helps people understand this skill set and how the physical and emotional are connected is a woman that came to my practice, oh gosh, some years ago, early on. And she had, something that nobody would consider really life threatening. It wasn't. It was a tendonitis in her wrist, but it was annoying to her. It had gone on for about a month, and she tried everything, and nothing was working. And she asked me to take a look at it. And I saw some really interesting things for her, which again point out how this process works. So, what I do when I look at the body is I'm going to look at the physical body. So, for me, it's like looking at kind of an MRI, except in color and in many cases, very, very detailed. I can see down to the cellular level. And so, when I looked at her wrist, um, what I saw was this inflamed tendons, and I saw underneath it a little fracture that had healed in her wrist bone. And again, if I didn't preface this, she'd had this issue for a month, and none of the interventions were working for her. So that's why she called me. So when I looked at that, I saw all the physical stuff. I could see that, but the bone fracture was really curious to me. And at this point is when I ask to see more about what it is I'm looking at, right? And so what I saw there was, remember I said it's like a little movie. I saw a little movie of her life. And what I saw was her at 20 years prior. She was about 40. So it was when she was in her 20s. She was playing tennis with her boyfriend, and she swung her racket to hit the ball, and she tripped and fell and broke her wrist. And that was that bone scar, that I saw there, that bone fracture that had healed. And I was asking her body, well, what does this mean? And it showed me another scene of her in the hospital, in the ER, with her boyfriend. And her boyfriend broke up with her right there in the ER,
Oh, wow.
which is like so cold. But
Yeah, that's
what
not
what
cool.
had not cool at all. What happened for her body and her mind and spirit at that moment was the wrist itself held on to this kind of physical imprint of the fracture, the physical pain of the fracture, mixed up with the emotional pain of the breakup right there in that instance. And I was telling her all of this, and she said, "Oh, I remember that." And then she said, "Oh my goodness!" She had one of those big light bulbs that came on, and she said, "I just broke up with my partner, her current partner, about a month prior, just before the tendonitis flared up." And for her body, all of this unresolved emotional pain manifested in this physical expression of tendonitis. She
Mm.
made that, I mean, I saw it, and she corroborated what I saw in the moment, which was really neat. And that was a big light bulb for her.
Yeah.
Now, there was more though, which is really fascinating about this. Her
Okay.
wrist had more to show me. And what her wrist showed me was an image of her at about age 5, holding that wrist for protection up in front of her face, and a cane striking her. And she was sort of in a dark enclosed space. I could see it looked like a closet. And there was, she was being beaten really with a cane, and she was holding her wrist up for protection. And as I was saying this, she said, "I know what this is." Her mother was mentally ill. She used to beat her with her cane and lock her in a closet in the hallway. And that was an early life trauma for her that also had to do with the fact that that wrist was holding on to physical and emotional trauma for most of her life, right?
Mm.
So that wrist has so much to show in terms of why it flared up in that way. Now, think about it, Stephan. You think about early life trauma that she was aware of, a later life experience that she had forgotten, and an in the present moment breakup with a partner and tendonitis in that same part of her body.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. It's all connected. And from a spiritual level, it seems to me that, this is just my guess, that maybe she was a bit cold in the way she broke up with her boyfriend the month prior, which was a little bit of what goes around comes around kind of lesson for her in the law of cause and effect.
Well, actually, her partner broke up with her.
Oh, I thought you said that she broke up with her partner a month earlier, and
No,
then
there
this.
was a breakup. I'm sorry if I said that wrong.
Oh,
For
okay.
in the way that she told me what happened, her partner broke up with her, and that triggered that earlier when
Okay.
the boyfriend broke up. But regardless, it's not like the wheel of karma so much, one to one cause and effect.
Mm.
It's more like how the body and the mind and spirit, again, I'm going to use the word metabolizes, not the way we use it physically, but energetically metabolizes trauma. And it's never about blame or fault. It's more about the awareness needs to come to the surface. Dr. Dean Ornish said something that I think is so right on. He said awareness is the first step in healing. That is the most important thing we can remember. When we are out of balance emotionally, physically, mentally, spiritually, there's healing that is being asked for. What is the healing? It happens on all of those levels. That particular instance for her was incredibly valuable because she made that connection. Let me tell you what happened for her.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the next step that I do as a medical intuitive is I ask the body, what does it want? What does it need? And she, there were some things in there. She wasn't sleeping well. Her gut was a little imbalanced. Mostly what was showing me was that there was an emotional need that needed to be dealt with. And she called me 2 days later and she said, the pain is gone. It was like she never had it. The wrist was completely healed. And she said what was most important to her, even though that was miraculous, right? Even more important to her was the fact that she could start to process the emotions of this really painful breakup because she was holding it in. She was not really getting deeply into it and experiencing it, and hearing from her body where all of this was being held in her past allowed her to open that door. And that was a real freeing experience for her. And the wrist was able to heal. Isn't that
Oh, wow.
interesting?
Yeah, amazing, amazing. Now you
Yeah.
mentioned out of balance a few times in this episode, and what occurs to me or pops in my mind when you say that is the movie Koyaanisqatsi, which is
Oh, yeah.
it's a Hopi Indian word for life out of balance. Have you seen that movie?
Yes, and it was a harbinger of things to come, that movie.
What comes to mind when you hear that word Koyaanisqatsi? What are or what's a message that you might
Hmm.
want to impart to our listener or viewer about out of balance based on hearing that word?
Such a good question. Um, you know, balance is hard to come by in our modern world. We are no longer the peaceful agrarians of, history. We live in a very fast-paced, intense world, and if you are an entrepreneur or even just living life, it's challenging. It's challenging on every level, and finding time to for self-care, put it that way, is a challenge for everybody on some level. We need to learn to build it in. We need to learn to take care of our physical organism, our spiritual being, our emotional being, our mental health care as well. We need to expand that out to our friends and family, understanding how those relationships work, nurturing them, taking care of them, leaving them if they don't work, that kind of thing. That's all self care. That kind of self care has this really awesome ripple effect into your life and into the lives around you. People say they start living differently when they start paying attention to that, their self care. They start living more consciously, and they start living their lives that way. I mean, in my trajectory, I'm like, what can I do to help the planet? What can I do to help people? What can I do? You start becoming more outward focused when you start taking care of that inward focus first. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, you
Yeah.
got to put your own oxygen mask on first, right?
There you go. Yeah. And some of us don't even know there's an oxygen mask you can put on.
Right. It's in the ethereal realm. You just have to reach up and then pull it down.
We make it sound so simple, but most people have trouble with this, and pretty much every one of my clients, even if they're very experienced meditators, there's information that has been, this is why people come to intuitives at all. What am I missing? What's the missing piece here? And we want to be able to see it so we can integrate, right?
Mm. Now, here's a concept I'd love to hear your take on. I learned this from Kabbalah, and
Mm.
actually, the guest I just interviewed a few hours ago mentioned it, and it wasn't. It was just in passing. He doesn't even study Kabbalah, as far as I know. And it's this idea that we rent our bodies from God.
Oh, that's gorgeous.
Yeah, it's not
I
our
love it.
body; it's God's, and we're renting it.
Sure.
Another thing too about this that I think is quite interesting is that our soul is bigger than our body. It's not our soul is inside our body. It's our body's inside our soul.
Well, you're spiritually, you're speaking my language there because that's the way we connect to do the work of intuition. We connect on a soul level, you could say, on a spiritual level. And that's beautiful. I have to tell you, it's so much fun. My experience of what you're talking about, that connection, is pure joy, pure fun, and in many cases, hilarity. It's just like, just joy. And
Yeah.
people talk about that in all different ways.
So what would be a way that somebody who's feeling animosity towards God or towards the the infinite, they're frustrated, they're angry, they feel resentful because they're going through some sort of physical ailment, they have some sort of chronic pain or disease, and they don't feel that joy. They don't think this is hilarious at all. They think this
No, it's
is
not.
unjust and downright evil. What do you tell somebody like that?
Well, I work with a lot of people who are going through some heavy stuff, right? Physical heavy stuff. And there's always information from their own connection, their higher self, their own, whatever you want to call that. There's always information from their own guidance about the what, the why, and the how. And that is in my world, that is critical information for releasing resentment, releasing anger, releasing um, bitterness and whatever is going on, that feeling of unjustness. Because, people ask me, can people get ill out of the blue? And my answer to that is, I've never seen it. It might happen, but I've never seen it. When I look, I see connections, and those connections are informational for people to use. And that information is profound, right? Because it is so personal. I've worked with people who know people who are terminal, who know they're dying and are making their peace with it. And you would think that would be the most, you know, painful, awful place to be. And it can be, but it can also be incredibly profound because there's so much to understand about life, about the life that we're living in. As you say, we're renting our bodies. What is that wonderful phrase? We're spirits in the material world, right? We're souls having a human experience, right? And that's the point of view of a medical intuitive. For one, that's the spiritual point of view. What is it I'm supposed to learn here? What is it? That's like the life lesson part. What am I supposed to learn? What is this about? There's so much richness in that. It's so valuable to us. I say, people have to go through what they go through to get there. And I'm sure you've interviewed people who have had near-death experiences, yeah, on your show.
Yes. Yep.
They
Yeah,
have
like
a lot
Dr.
to
Evan
say.
Alexander, for example, author
Yes.
of
Oh,
Proof of Heaven.
wonderful. There are so many stories. There's so much information out there. It's even vetted research, peer-reviewed research on this topic. It's not a topic that I'm really an expert in at all. So I look to those experts to say, okay, what do we need to know about this, right? And in every case, it seems that we have a broader consciousness. We are part of a whole. What does that mean to us in our physical body when we're going through something that is, physically, and there's a big imbalance going on and you want to know? I'll tell you what it is. And I love that you're asking me these questions. You're kind of helping me. Most interviewers don't, Stephan, so you know that. Talking about the spiritual side of this, we want to know that. We want to know that there's more information, that there's a purpose for our life. There's a purpose for our being. And what is that purpose? And maybe that purpose is just to love ourselves and forgive ourselves and others. Love others, forgive others, find that place of peace within ourselves. And that's, that can be heavy lifting when you're dealing with something.
Yeah.
But it's also part of the reason for being a human, put it that way. Yep. How about that?
That's one of the key lessons for Earth School.
There you go. I like that. Yes.
Yeah. And by the way, that quote, I believe, is we're not human beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a human experience. And I think it was Wayne Dyer.
Oh, Wayne Dyer said that. And I think there was a French philosopher who also said something like that.
Oh, could be. Yeah.
And I think
Probably
people have been saying that all the way, all the way back to the Greek philosophers and ancient and beyond. It's something that this idea of human spirituality and what it means is, of course, it's ancient. It's what we are. So, gotten a little lost over the years, but we're here again.
Yeah. Now, I'm curious to hear what your take is on some of the more out there ideas around why something is showing up in one's physicality. And I'll give you a couple examples, like negative energetic implants or an alien abduction. What's your response to that? Do you take that at face value when somebody tells you that they were an abductee? Are you able to see that in your visions when you're connecting to somebody's body and energy?
I believe everybody at face value because our experience is our experience, right? Who am I to say it's not? Goodness gracious, I never would do that. Have I worked with people who have had extraterrestrial connections or experiences years ago, when I first started this work. And, look, I'll tell people what I see, but here's the thing I want to impart. This is going to sound a little weird, so let me see how I can phrase it. Regardless of the issue, whether it comes from that perspective or any other, there's still information from guidance from their physical bodies as well as to why that happened in the first place. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So it's less about the issue, it's more about the why and how and the how. The how meaning how can you shift this energy if you don't want to be playing in it, right? Right. And so people, traditionally with psychics, people say, when am I going to find my true love? When am I going to find my perfect job and all that? Those great questions.
Yeah.
Um,
What are the winning lottery numbers?
all that. So the answer for me, years ago, I was, a kind of a practicing psychic as well. I'm like, well, let's look at that. That's an interesting thing to look at. It wasn't about the physical body. It was about all that other stuff. And I would say, well, let's look at why why you're what's in the way of that happening for you. What I love about the whole law of attraction work that's been brought forward over the last couple of decades is it really speaks to that, right? It's not about the thing, it's about the lack of thing, right? It's not about the experience with extraterrestrial. It's about why did that happen in the first place and what is there to learn about that. It's not about the perfect job. It's about what is it you really want and what are the blocks to receiving that, right? So that's a perspective that we mostly don't have in the world. Mostly people are like, I want this and this is why, or I don't want this and this is why, right? But what about why it manifested in the first place? That's where I go. To me, that's the underlying root cause, right? In healthcare, it's what's the body, from the body perspective. In every other part of life, it's what is generating that imbalance, right?
Yeah. What would be an example of an underlying root cause, like spiritual root cause, that was maybe quite surprising, maybe a case study in your book that comes to mind, where once you dug into the root cause, it really surprised you, surprised your client and patient?
Yeah, I have clients, not patients.
Yeah.
And I'm a health coach as well. I'm still in the client zone. But I'll give you an example of a young man who, and now all of this is from the medical intuitive perspective. So it's the body's imbalance that we're looking to see information through. This is in the book. And a gentleman named Robert, who was having a lot of gut health issues and ongoing, and he couldn't find any help in conventional medicine. It was just a real point of it was a real pain point for him. He really felt like it was interfering with his life. It was interfering with his life. And when I looked into his energy, there was a lot of information physically, but because you're asking about root cause that's not non-physical, everything had to do with a couple of instances in his young life where I'll get to the right root cause. I mean, I went down kind of a life history with him, but at the root of it, he was 3 months old and his mother got ill, and she had some kind of infectious, illness. And so he had to be separated from his mother for about 2 weeks. And that experience for him was traumatic at that age. And that trauma carried forward through other instances in his life till the present moment. Now, in his life in the present moment, his mother had died some time before at a distance from him, right? So that experience of him not being with his mother when she was dying and early life when she was very ill had this cumulative effect that caused a gut imbalance that was not changing no matter what he did. So now I've lost the thread of what you asked me. Sorry, Stephan.
Yeah. So it was basically a surprising
Oh, that was
spiritual
surprising.
root cause.
Yeah, the spiritual root cause for him was a separation from everything look, when we're children, mother is all, right? We are born in our mother's bodies, and at 3 months old, mother is life. Mother actually brings life. And for him, that was a spiritual connection that he had with his mother his whole life, that replayed itself later in life with her loss. And it physically manifested in this very debilitating uh, gut health issue. That surprised him. It's surprising for me after 20 years of doing this work. Nothing really surprises me, but it's always fascinating to look at. And it made sense to him. He understood it. But I will tell you that the element of surprise is often there in these medical intuitive sessions, because, and the same with that first client I told you about. She had a memory of these things. He didn't remember the early life experience. So that can be a surprise, but the connection that it makes is always a bit surprising, because we don't think logically. Logically, our mind doesn't make those connections. Our spirit, our energy, our bodies make those connections.
Amazing stuff. I'm sad we have to wrap up the interview. We're already at an hour. So if our listener or viewer wants to work with you privately, I guess you still take on private clients, correct?
I do. Yes,
Yep.
absolutely.
So how do they get in touch? What kind of fees do you charge? How does it work?
So you go to the website, which is thepracticalpath.com. Again, thepracticalpath.com, all one word. And there's all kinds of information on there. There's information about the medical intuitive training program for wellness professionals. There's information about the medical intuition for healing and self-care, which is open to everyone, and that's launching soon. There's information about my services, and you can get a 60-minute or 30-minute session about our graduates, about what we offer, more about medical intuition, about the book. There's a lot there. And there's also some guided meditations that are free, and I recommend people listen to them. They're about grounding and about protecting your energy and about working with your energy in a way that is really helpful. So a lot of good stuff there.
Okay, awesome. We'll include links, direct links to that stuff in the show notes as well.
Thank
Fabulous. Now, if someone is not a medical professional and they're not in the wellness industry, can they still take your, I guess, is it an in-person course?
Yeah, everything, the medical intuitive training is a live online program,
Okay.
meaning it's taught in the Zoom environment. We have people from all over the world, and it's just a wonderful program. There are a lot of people who want to learn this skill who are not necessarily wouldn't match our prerequisite. However, we encourage people to think about using medical intuition in the context of healthcare. What does that mean? That could be nutritional counseling, right? There's a lot of need for that. That could be health and wellness coaching, a lot of need for that. Fitness training, things like that, yoga. We encourage people who want to become medical intuitives and train with me to think about getting a certification and some practice, professional practice in things like health coaching. Health coaching is a phenomenal field, a brand new field, relatively speaking, and it's a good doorway into this work. And it's also taken seriously by the healthcare industry, which is nice. So that's one option. There are several.
Awesome. And again, your website is thepracticalpath.com. And
Yes.
what's your most popular or most frequent social platform that you're on?
Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Wendie. This was fabulous and very inspiring. You're doing God's work out there in the world,
Thank you.
and keep it up.
Thank you so much, Stephan. Absolutely a pleasure.
Thank you. And thank you, listener. Thank you for your open-mindedness and your willingness to suspend disbelief. We'll catch you on the next episode. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, signing off.